as I was trying to figure out what to do, this talk is huge, and there's like so much that you can talk about. There's like a lot of stories that you can choose to pick from to focus on. So if I am focusing on certain verses and stories, and you're like, but John, there's like this other verse, why didn't you choose that one? Because you don't want to be here for 5 hours. So whatever verses and stories I chose are just the ones you're going to have to deal with tonight, and then you can go and learn more in the Bible on your own. But the verse that I chose for us to kind of think about for the whole night, as we're thinking through the whole thing, is Proverbs 12:26. It says, "The righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray." The righteous should choose his friends carefully, for the way of the wicked leads them astray. So you're going to see on the bottom of every slide, it's going to remind you of Proverbs 12:26, so that way it can kind of get drilled into our head a little bit. And I labeled the talk Against the Grain because I realized that picking good friends nowadays is kind of against the grain. Like, the majority of the world just lets us take in everybody that's willing to be our friends. Like, we're like, oh, you want to be my friend? Okay. You want to be my friend? Okay. So it's a little bit against the grain what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to talk about being picky, right? You're supposed to be picky when it comes to friends, and we're going to see why. We're going to see how. We're going to see examples, all right? So just keep that in mind. All right, there's going to be two stories that we're going to talk about. They're going to come at the end of the talk, okay? The two stories are going to be Abraham's servant, whom he sent out to find a wife for his son. Who's his son? Isaac. Very good. Did everybody know that? All right. His son Isaac, right? So that's one story we're going to cover. And then there's a story in the Gospel of St. Luke about 10 lepers that went to Jesus, and only one of them came back and said thank you. The other 9 didn't, after he healed all 10 of them. And we'll see why we're even talking about that. What does that have to do with friendship, right? But as a hint, Abraham's servant, we're going to talk about discernment from that story. And the 10 lepers, we're going to talk about this concept of recognition. How do I recognize something when I see it, right? So, why? Why do we care about choosing friends? Right? We're going to answer a few questions. We're going to answer why, how, who, and when. All right? So kind of easy. Hopefully we can like put it in boxes in our brains. If we're women, we can just put it in a spaghetti bowl. I know that's how your brain works, right? So there's spaghetti bowl, boxes. It's okay. We can work with both. All right. So why? Here's why. Why? Because this is what happens. As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. This is why. If I don't have good friends, I am not going to be sharpened. I'm going to look like those dull, rusted nails on the bottom, right? So it is actually a thing that I need a friend so they can sharpen me, right? Because in interacting with a good friend, they're going to bring up the Word of God. They're going to bring up the expectations of God. They're not going to make me feel comfortable when I'm being a hypocrite. They're not going to make me feel okay when I am doing the wrong thing and calling it right. So a good friend is going to sharpen me when I'm becoming dull, right? And it's really about becoming dull to the Word of God, right? The idea is when one falls, the other one picks him up, and so forth. And Christ, this is why Christ sent his apostles 2 by 2. He said, I'm going to send you 2 by 2, so when one of you falls, the other one picks him up, right? And there's another part in the Bible that says, woe is it to the man who's by himself, because when he falls, he finds no one to pick him up, right? So the why is really important, because as I go out there and I start choosing people, imagine if I choose someone who's dull. How is that person going to sharpen me? It's impossible, right? It's like having a dull knife at home, and I'm trying to sharpen it with another dull knife. Useless. It'll never work. You can go do this all day long, and nothing will happen, right? You have to have a sharpening stone or something that is sharper than the original to sharpen it as well. So why? Because iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. What does the countenance of his friend mean? The face. What does that mean? What does that mean I'm going to sharpen your face? That sounds actually kind of like crazy. Like, I don't want somebody to sharpen my face. What does that mean that you're going to sharpen the countenance of your friend? What's a countenance besides face? But it is face. But like character, attitude, outlook. Do you guys remember when Cain was about to kill his brother? Does anybody remember that? Does somebody know where that is in the Bible? Genesis 4? Okay, bring it up. If you know where it is, bring it up. It is in, I think, Genesis 4. That might be correct. All right. And you have a mic in your hand, so it's perfect. I think that verse, there's a verse in there that says countenance in it. Can you read that verse for us? A few minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is
Go ahead.
All right, Genesis 4, verse 5. But he did not respect Cain and his offering, and Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell.
Anybody have any idea what was just said? Who did not respect Cain and his offering? Hands? If you know who it is, just raise your hand. I just want to know if you know your Bible. Who did not respect Cain and Cain got upset about it? God, right? Cain and Abel came to God and they both put offerings in front of God. And God looked at Abel's offering and said, this is a great offering, I accept it. And he looked at Cain's offering and said, this is not good, and I'm not going to accept it. And it said Cain got angry. Can you read that last part again?
But he did not respect Cain and his offering, and Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell.
And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. By the way, this is the first time that word appears in the Bible. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Before then, nobody's countenance had fallen, right? Countenance is like my approach to my relationship with God, my approach to life, my future thoughts, right? When Cain's sacrifice was not accepted, it says his countenance, he got angry and his countenance fell. He no longer thought positively at all. Everything was just dark. Now let's see what this verse says. As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. The reality is, a lot of times we're going to face hard things in life. And sometimes we're going to face hard things in our spiritual life. And sometimes our reaction is going to be for our countenance to fall. But when I have a good friend, they're going to sharpen me, and they're not going to allow my countenance to fall. Sharpens the countenance of his friend. What happened with Cain when his countenance fell is he completely forgot what God said to him. God tried to talk to him, it didn't matter. He told him sin is at the door, it didn't matter. And he ended up killing his brother. The first murder in history, right? But it all happened because there was no one there to lift his countenance, to help him readjust how he sees what is happening. Even though God spoke to him, he ignored it as if he didn't hear it. Now, a good friend keeps you sharp, doesn't allow that to happen. All right? Are we following, or is this like... I can't tell if you guys are like asleep with your eyes open or like not really sure what's happening here. But, all right. Okay, why else do I need good friends? Because here's the opposite. Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. If you don't have a good friend, what are you going to have? A bad friend. That's just how it works, right? Now, if you're really alone, come and talk to me at the end of this, and we'll figure something out. You should not be by yourself. You should have at least one friend, at least one good friend. Does anybody here have one good friend? Look to your right and to your left. Is there anybody that you like in this room? I see a lot of people going, no. You're sitting next to the wrong people. This is great. Or maybe I said, do you have a good friend? Let's just look around. Is this even a friend? Like, maybe you don't know if they're good friends, and we're going to discover that today, right? But evil company corrupts good habits. So if I don't have friends that are going to sharpen my countenance, I'm going to have friends that are going to corrupt whatever good is left in me. And by the way, as you read more and more in the Bible about this topic, you realize that there's no middle ground. There's no friend that just hangs out and doesn't do something. Every day you hang out with this friend, one of two things will happen. They will either bring you closer to the Lord, or their existence in your life will bring you farther away from the Lord. Because they're going to become more important than the Lord. Or they're going to talk to you about things that are frivolous and take your thoughts away from the Lord. Right? Your friend is going to have an effect. Okay? So, like, it's either or. So you're either on the right side of this column or on the left side of this column. You're either going to have a friend that sharpens you and lifts up your countenance, or you're going to have a friend that is evil or neutral and is eventually going to corrupt any good habits that were left inside. These are only two options. Clear? All right. Okay, well, how? Great. Now I know that I have to have a good friend because bad friends are bad and they're going to corrupt me. So how? How do I do that? A couple of things. And you're going to find that a few of these verses come from the book of Sirach, because the book of Sirach talks a lot about friendship. So it's a really good book when you're trying to figure out how to measure friends, how to figure out if you're actually a friend or not a friend. So there's quite a few verses that we're going to use tonight from the book of Sirach. Here's how. It says, kindness in speech multiplies friends, and a gracious tongue leads to friendly responses. Be at peace with many people, but allow only 1 in 1,000 to be your advisor. So, I want you to pay attention to what's happening here. Because sometimes what we say to ourselves and what we say out loud is there aren't good people. I can't find friends. I don't know how to make good friends. People don't like me. I'm going to be very honest with you today. So if this is like the first time you hear me speak, may God help your soul. Just understand that this is normal. It's nothing against you personally, okay? But sometimes we just suck, right? Like sometimes I suck as a person. So if a sucky person goes out to look for friends, guess what they're not going to find? Good friends. They're just going to find other sucky friends, right? So what does it say here? It says here, kindness in speech multiplies friends. So sometimes we go around and we say, bro, I'm just brutally honest, man. You're like, no, you're rude, right? And it says kindness in speech multiplies friends. So when you're rude and you're wondering why I can't find a friend, Sirach 6:5 says, because you suck. Okay? So, kindness in speech, be kind. Like, let your tongue only speak goodness. If I am going out to look for a friend who's going to sharpen me, who's going to be attracted to me to sharpen me if I am constantly negative, if I am constantly critical, if I am constantly angry, if I am constantly selfish? You guys understand what I'm saying? It starts inside. It starts here. So the how is really here first, right? I have to figure out, because like a lot of people, really, I'm not kidding this time, a lot of people do wonder, like, why is it I'm alone? Why is it that I can't find friends? And sometimes it's really just my tongue is not very helping. It's not helping me, right? Kindness in speech multiplies friends, and a gracious tongue leads to friendly responses. What is a gracious tongue? Somebody, like, give me an interpretation of what does that mean. What is a gracious tongue? Okay, what is gracious? What does that come from? What word? What? Grace. Very good. So gracious comes from grace, right? So a gracious tongue is a tongue who shows everyone what? Very good. So one of the things that I have to do to find good friends is to be willing to show others grace, right? You know, the concept of today's talk is that it is difficult as a Christian to find good friends. And a lot of times it's because as a Christian, I'm not actually being a good Christian. So I have to fix some things inside of me when I'm looking to make good friends. Kindness and gracious tongue. Be at peace with many people, but allow only 1 in 1,000 to be your advisor. Sometimes we have very sharp elbows, right? You just walk around, and in Arabic, it's like there's a phrase called garr shakal. Garr shakal, it's like, okay, I'm going to tell you about this friend that I had. He was the definition of what I'm trying to say, and when I explain it, it'll mean so much more than the Arabic that some of you don't understand what I just said. We used to have this guy, or I still have this guy, but when we were younger, teenagers in high school, his name was Pete. Pete, his nickname was Pete the Killer. And you'll understand why in a second. Pete was a monster, okay? He was a block of muscle. He was like this. He couldn't even reach his back. That's how big his muscles were, okay? Exactly like Yusuf, yes. Go ahead. Right? He couldn't reach his back, right? And he was just very, very muscular. But Pete has a chip on his shoulder. We would walk in a high school, and it's high school, right? There's kids everywhere. And if somebody accidentally stepped on his shoe, Pete would be like, I'm going to see you after school. Like, right away. And of course, this human child just like falls. Like, because if Pete is going to see you after school, that means your jaw is broken. Like, we're going to take you to the hospital. Like, Pete doesn't see you after school. Pete sees you after school, right? So Pete was like garra shakal, right? Like, he just looked for trouble everywhere he went. He had very sharp elbows. He had a chip on his shoulder. And it was all because somewhere inside of him, he felt the need to, like, prove himself. Now, a man like that could only find friends like me at the time and a group of friends that we were. And none of us were sharpening anything, right? Like, we were all just horrible friends being horrible to each other. So, you have to be at peace with people. You can't walk into a room and all of a sudden everybody, like, clinches up. They're like, ah, Mariam is here again. I don't know what we're going to do, right? But, like, if Mariam walks into the room and brings peace, then people can go and approach Mariam, right? And allow only 1 in 1,000 to be your advisor. Now, that's a key word right there, right? You really have to be picky. You can meet 1,000 people. They can all seem fine and friendly and smiling, but only one of them can be your advisor. Only one of them can really be a good friend. Then Sirach 6:7 says, when you wish to acquire a new friend, first test him, and do not be too hasty to trust him. Some of these verses, by the way, sound like very anti-Christian, right? Like, you almost like feel like, what do you mean, man? I'm a Christian. It's just like, trust everybody. You're not a hippie, you're a Christian, right? Like, those are two very different things, right? As a Christian, we're called to test the spirits. It says whenever a spirit comes to you, test the spirit. Don't just let anything like into your like heart. Your heart should not be a revolving door, right? It should be like a metal detector, right? I am going to check everything that comes in, and I'm not going to check everything that goes out. That's how my heart is supposed to work. So, how? First, be kind, be gracious, offer peace, and be selective, and test that friend. So even after you choose that 1 out of 1,000, now you got to put him through some tests. Now you got to see, if I give him a little bit of trust, does he betray the trust? Or am I going to go tell him everything about my life? Right? Have you ever met with somebody and like, all right, don't be mad at me, okay? But ladies say this more than men, right? They'd be like, oh, we met the other day and we talked all night and we said everything about our lives. I'm like, the first night? Like, yeah, we're just like best friends now. The first night? Like, that takes years, right? It takes years. Now, I'm going to tell you something. When I was a teenager, I probably told Pete everything about my life the first night, right? But it wasn't very wise. So, we have to test this friend that is walking into my life. I have to take it little by little. When you wish to acquire a new friend, first test him and do not be too hasty to trust him. By the way, this process takes effort. That's why it's hard as a Christian to make a friend. Not because you're blocked off and you hate people, but because you're careful who you bring in, because that friend should be a lifelong friend. It is not a revolving door. I'm not going to keep bringing people in and exiting people out. That's not how it should work. So as a Christian, it is hard to pick up people because it's a process. And you have to be willing to put the work, right? You can't just meet somebody and all good. All right, who? So now we know, what do we know? Now we know why. Now we know how. Okay, well, who? What are the kind of people I should be looking for? Again, we'll go to Sirach, and we'll go to Sirach 37 this time. And it says this, rather associate with a devout person whom you know to be a keeper of the commandments. Whom you know to be a keeper of the commandments. Who is of one mind with you, and who will sympathize with you if you fall. Okay. Now, this is an actual serious question, not trying to be funny. Raise your hand if you have one of these friends. Okay, that's awesome, actually. And if you haven't raised your hand, I'm happy for you because that means you still have the opportunity to be selective, right? And now you know the selection process. And now you know the categories. The categories are this. Rather associate with a, can we say that loud just so I know you're alive? Devout person, whom you know to be a keeper of the commandments. So what's one of the first things I'm going to do? I'm going to watch, right? When I want Maryam to be a friend of mine, I'm going to watch Maryam. I'm picking on Maryam just because I know I can and she's not going to get upset. So I'm going to watch Maryam. I'm going to see, does Maryam, is she devout? Like when there's church on a Sunday, like does she show up? Okay, maybe one Sunday she missed because she was sick. That's fine, right? But is it like the norm that she just never comes to church? Is it the norm that she doesn't want to serve, doesn't want to be in church, doesn't want to help when somebody needs help? Like, is she devout, right? And then, is she a keeper of the commandments? Because sometimes there's like fake devout, right? Oh yeah, Maryam comes to church all the time. But what is she doing when she's at church? Does she actually keep the commandments? Is the Lord truly in her heart and on the front of her mind? Or is she just at church all the time? I'm not going to tell you which daughter this is because sometimes she gets upset when I highlight her. But one of my daughters. How'd you know? All right. Anyway, one of my daughters, sometimes she'll tell me like, Baba, I need to go to church. There's like this like tasbihah that's happening and I have to go attend tasbihah. And I'm like, pause. So you're telling me you're going to go just to attend tasbihah? Like your focus is tasbihah? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, cool. Oh, by the way, who's going? Ruru, Keti, blah, 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 right? And I'm like, oh, okay, very good. So how about this? How about if we don't go to tasbihah tonight, but we go to a different church for tasbihah? She's like, why would we do that? And I'm like, what's the difference? Is Jesus there any different than the Jesus in St. Mark? So very quickly, I'm hoping that over time I am teaching her that you should really be aware of your desires and the reality of why we do things, right? So as you're evaluating a friend, you should be doing the same thing. You should recognize, is this friend of mine actually a keeper of the commandments? Are they actually devout? Do they actually love the Lord above all else? Because I'm about to trust that person with everything that I have, right? So if they don't love God above all else, they're not worthy of this trust that I want to give them. Rather, associate with a devout person whom you know to be a keeper of the commandments, who is of one mind with you and will sympathize with you if you fall. And then in Sirach 13 it says, do not bear a burden too heavy for you, or associate with someone who is greater or wealthier than you. Kind of weird, right? Or associate with someone who's greater or wealthier than you. How can the clay pot be used with the iron cauldron? When they collide, the pot will be smashed. This is something that we underestimate a lot. I need to have friends that are similar to me, that could understand my circumstances. I need to have friends that when push comes to shove, we don't break each other because we have no understanding of each other's lives. Nancy comes and speaks to me about something, and I'm like, whatever, man, like, just get over it. Because we live completely different lives. We are not even on the same planet. But I'm supposed to be her friend. That's not real friendship, right? So in Sirach it says, make sure that it's iron with iron, clay with clay, somebody that can truly relate to what you're going through, somebody that can truly relate to where you are in life, right? Or at least somebody that can help you in that part of your life. Sometimes we misunderstand the idea of being selective as being prideful, or being selective as being hateful. And it's not the same, right? The Bible is telling me when it comes to that 1 in 1,000 that you're going to bring into your heart, be very selective. Love everyone. Hate no one. Judge no one. Despise no one. But when you're choosing a friend, be very selective on who this person can be in your life. Devout, keeper of the commandments, who will sympathize with you when you fall. How can the clay pot be used with the iron cauldron? The pot will be smashed if they don't match. Okay, when? When is a good time to choose friends? In Proverbs 13:20 it says this, "He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed." And of course, the first thing you're going to think of is, John, this verse has no timing to it at all. So why is it under the when? Because when is actually always. There is no time when I'm choosing good friends and a time where I can sit back and not. Okay? What it's saying is, he who walks with wise men will be wise. So it's all the time. Every step that I take, if what I'm surrounding myself with are wise people, this is my group of friends, I'll be wise. And if my companions are fools, then I'll be destroyed. Now, I want you to understand, we're reading verses from the Bible, so these are not suggestions. These are truths. This is reality. Okay? I found 3 quotes from 3 different fathers that kind of talk about this importance of a friendship, right? So when you're being asked today to be selective and to take your time and to give little by little and watch, you need to know why is it important, right? We've already gone through a lot of verses, and I wanted to show you 3 church fathers that kind of harp in these quotes on the importance of friendship. St. Augustine says, "In this life, 2 things should be valued: life and friendship." That's a big statement. Do you agree? Do you think this is a big statement? This is a big statement. St. Augustine is saying, in this life, in this day-to-day thing that we're doing here on earth, value 2 things: life itself that God gave you, and friendship. This is how important friendship is. It is not optional. It is not a thing that I can survive without, right? By the way, even when you start thinking about desert fathers that go and live in the desert for 60, 70, 80 years, a lot of them will live 5, 10 years by themselves, and all of a sudden they'll get an urge to go visit the other desert father 10 kilometers out. And they'll go walk for 10 kilometers to have a 30-minute conversation. And they'll be like, okay, see you in the next 10 years. Okay? That's fine, but that's friendship. It's like friendship at their level, right? I'm not telling you that's what we should be doing. We're at a very different level. But even the desert fathers, God puts an inkling inside their heart to go out and seek friendship at their level, right? In this life, 2 things should be valued: life and friendship. St. Gregory Nazianzen says this: "A friend is one soul abiding in 2 bodies." That's beautiful, and it is heavy. You thought marriage was the only thing that made you one, right? That was the Bible. Now St. Gregory Nazianzen is saying, look, yes, that is true, but there's a very close thing to it. Not quite marriage. There's a very close thing to it where a friend is one soul abiding in 2 bodies. This is why it said a clay pot and an iron pot could not mix, right? There has to be a lot of similarities, things that we share. One soul living in 2 bodies. Who do you want to share your soul with? That's really the question, right? Because that's really what it's coming down to, right? You're about to really trust this person with a lot. You're sharing a lot. Am I willing to be careful enough? Am I willing to go slow? Or am I just going to be like, oh, this is great? Okay, fine, that's the girl. The guys are like, hey, man, yeah, want to be friends? That's it? Want to be friends? That's not how it works, right? Maybe in high school, that's what we did. Problem is, I know some of you guys ever since like 5th grade, okay? So I know how some of these friendships have developed over years, and it wasn't much more than what I just did right now, all right? Just so we're clear. I don't want to blow everybody's spot. And then lastly, St. John Chrysostom said this: there is nothing more precious than a true friend, for such a one is indeed a second self. These are 3 really amazing church fathers. In case you don't know who they are, go look them up. This is not a history lesson, but these are great guys. Okay, like when these guys speak, we listen and we pay attention. In this life, 2 things should be valued: life and friendship. A friend is one soul abiding in 2 bodies. There is nothing more precious than a true friend, for such a one is indeed a second self. All right. Before we walk into the story of Abraham's servant and the 10 lepers, and those are going to be very quick stories, are we convinced that this is work? Raise your hands if you're convinced that you have to do some work. This is work, right? As a Christian, choosing a friend and bringing good people into my life is work, because this is what they're worth. This is what they mean in my life. So don't be quick to just take in anybody. Take your time. You're not refusing them, but take your time. Measure, understand, test, see if they're similar. Any comments or questions or... Yes. Somebody give her a mic as she's chewing. Fine. Somebody give her a mic that works.
Check.
There you go. It works.
اشتغل. Thank
All
you.
right.
So, I like.
Did you forget the question? What is happening right now?
No, sorry.
All right.
So there are like a concept of like circles of friends. I feel like this is more like, and more like a childish way to say it. This is like bestie level, and there's like
Bestie level?
levels under. There's like friends, and there's friends of friends, and there's real friends, and then there's besties. I feel like this is more like married
So what you're saying
besties.
is...
Not in a weird way.
So what you're saying is St. Augustine should have said, in this life, 2 things should be valued: life and besties. Is that what you're saying?
Was
A
that a
bestie-
Cheetos commercial? Sorry.
A bestie is one soul abiding in 2 bodies. There's nothing more precious than a true bestie, for such a one is indeed a second half. That's what we're saying? All right. So I am actually going to agree with you, and here's why. I'm actually going to agree with you a lot, and here's why. I think God tells us that the entire earth is under the sway of the devil. And the devil understands how humans work. If I can only change your language, I can downgrade certain concepts, right? So if I can get you to call everyone friend, and then we can introduce, and I'm not joking, I'm actually being serious, and then we introduce bestie, then when you read the Bible, and you read all these verses about friendship, in your mind, who does it apply to? Everyone. It doesn't apply to besties, right? Because in your mind, there's no difference. A friend is just a friend. That's what the world has been telling me for years. If I meet you and we have coffee together, and I meet you again and we have coffee together, maybe a third time if I meet you and we have coffee together, you are now a friend. But the Bible actually makes a very big distinction for the word friend. So, that big circle of people that you know, they're not friends. You can call them anything else. Call them besties. But the word friend, according to the biblical definition, is that 1, maybe 2, possibly, if you're lucky, 3. Because it takes so much work to find that person. And I want to tell you something. The world also says your bestie can be your bestie because you're spending a lot of time with them. And that's not a thing. That process that we talked about today, the examining, the looking at, the making sure we share things, the making sure you are holy, you are devout, you are a follower of the commandment, a keeper of the commandments, all of that is what builds my bestie. So be careful, because sometimes the world changes the language, so we have a hard time understanding what the Bible is actually referring to. I would love to see St. Augustine know that this is how we're changing his life and besties. Any other questions before we move on? Yes, back there. Somebody give her a mic, please. Sorry, I'm asking you to use a mic just because they're recording. So if I start answering without them hearing the question, it's going to sound really weird.
So not a question, just a comment. I liked what you shared about the countenance, because when I think of countenance, I think of where are your eyes. And so the idea of having another person in your life who's lifting up your eyes back to God. And it also made me think of, in like the second volume of Elements, Elijah always saying to look up. And so having somebody in your life to tell you to look up in every situation, to know that he is present and he's with you, I think is really important in friendship.
That's why they have to be devout and a keeper of the commandments. They have to love God so they can refer you to him, right? If your friend loves anything else more than God, when you find yourself in trouble, they're going to refer you to that thing. They're going to refer you to like media. Or, oh, you're sad today? Let me send you like a funny cat video. Like, what a great friend you are. A cat video? That's it? Like, so you're right. A true friend is going to point my eyes to where they need to go to when they're not looking in the right place. Yes? Mike?
Oh, hello. Can you go back to the verse from Sirach about like iron and clay? Yeah, yeah, that one. So Sirach 13:2. I guess we're interpreting it as like make sure you have enough similarities with the people you associate yourself with. But then like we mentioned how it's odd that it says who is greater or wealthier than you. Like how. Like, what do you think this encompasses? Like, does it really matter about social class and stuff like that, or what do you think?
In this part in Sirach, it was specifically focused on wealth versus being poor. And it was talking about that, like, real friendship is difficult to strike between somebody who social class is so different. Our day-to-day thoughts are different. If I'm the one that's in poverty, what's my day-to-day focus? Survival. If I happen to be wealthy, what's my day-to-day focus? Like comfort, increasing my wealth. Like, how can we actually connect, right? Like, what are we actually connecting about, right? So a lot of my day-to-day life has to be somewhat in the same realm, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're making like $50 an hour and I'm making 65. I think we're fine, right? What I think here in the book of Sirach specifically, it's talking about like a vast gap in socioeconomics, because it does make a difference on what I'm thinking about, right? Now, there's a difference between like somebody who's wealthy, but in their heart, they live poverty. Like their money is not a thing in their mind, right? They just give all that away. I think here it's specifically talking about somebody who is actually different because of their wealth or their poverty, and they don't see eye to eye, right? But you can take the same thing and apply it to all parts of my life, right? Do I share similarities with this person that I'm becoming friends with, or are we just on completely different planes? Any other questions or comments? Yes, Jessica. Mike?
Okay. So I have a question actually about the same verse.
Mm-hmm.
So about the clay pot and the iron cauldron, when you were saying it, I thought of like, iron sharpens iron. But what if you are the clay pot trying to become iron? Like in those cases, do you look at a friend who maybe is more spiritual than you, closer to the church and to God than you? Or is it saying to find someone who's also trying to become like iron, but is still also a clay pot? Like,
So I
does
think
that
if,
question make sense?
yeah, I think if our focus is the same, but we're at different stages, it doesn't make me clay and iron. We're still both clay, or we're still both iron, right? It's just one of us is sharper than the other, right? So it doesn't change. But if my focus is different, then I'm clay and they're iron, right? But if we're both focused on the Lord, but they've had this life with Him longer and they're ahead spiritually, we're still on the same path, right? So a lot of it is the idea that are we on the same path or are we on two separate paths? Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Okay. So we're going to look at the story of Abraham's servant real quick, and we're going to try to take what was happening with Abraham and his servant in choosing a wife for his son. And I just want us to focus on the concept of discernment and why that matters. Okay? They're not actually talking about friendships, but I want you to look above what they're talking about. Okay? This comes from Genesis 24, and it starts in verse 3. It says, "And I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you," this is Abraham talking to his servant, "that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but you shall go to my country and to my family and take a wife for my son Isaac." And the servant said to him, "Perhaps the woman will not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I take your son back to the land from which you came?" But Abraham said to him, "Beware that you do not take my son back there. The Lord God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my family, and who spoke to me and swore to me, saying, 'To your descendants I give this land,' He will send His angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. And if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be released from this oath. Only do not take my son back there." You'll see it's kind of hard. I'm sorry. Can I increase it a little bit? I'm just messing it all up. All right. So in the story of Abraham, Abraham sat and spoke to his servant and was telling him, "Listen, I need you to go find a wife for my son Isaac." At this moment, Sarah had died, and he wants to get his son married. And he says, "Okay, look, we're living here with the Canaanites. This is the land that we were promised. But there's no woman here that I want for my son. There's no woman here that I want for my son. Abraham, there's like a ton of women in Canaan. Like, why can't you just pick one?" And he says, No. I'm going to send my servant to my fathers, to the land where we came from, because I know those folks. I know how they were raised. I know how they are. I want like a daughter-in-law from there for Isaac. So he says, "I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife from my son from the daughters of the Canaanites." Now, Abraham was really old, by the way, at this moment. So a part of it, too, he was saying, "Listen, man, if anything happens to me, I don't want you to get him a wife from here. Like, if I'm not around, make sure you swear you're not going to get him a wife from here," right? But Abraham said to him, "Beware that you do not take my son back there." So his servant says, "Okay, fine, no problem. How about this? Why don't I take your son with me to your old land and let him choose a wife from there?" You would think Abraham would be like, "Oh yeah, that sounds good. Take him on a trip, have him choose the wife that he wants, and bring him back." But Abraham doesn't. Abraham says, No. This is the land we were promised. I don't want you to take Isaac to another land. I don't want Isaac's eyes to get distracted. I don't want him to get attracted to another land. This is the land we are promised by God. Do not take my son there, but go get his wife from there. The Lord God of heaven, who took me from my father's house, swore to me, saying, "To your descendants I give this land." But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be released from your oath. Only do not take my son back there. The reason I took this part and we were talking about discernment is Abraham, in this way of requesting from his servant a wife for his son, was very discerning of a lot of things. He thought of a lot of things, right? He said, I don't want a wife from this area, but I also don't want my son to go back to that area. Like, the two requests kind of like look like they're against each other, but they're not against each other. He understands what he's asking for because he's discerning what could happen to Abraham, and he's discerning what it means to bring a wife from here versus from there. There's a lot of discernment in what Abraham is saying to his servant. And he's saying what? The Lord God of heaven, who took me from my father's house, swore to me, saying, to your descendants I give this land. If you're trying to figure out why I'm being so picky, it's because this is the land I was promised. And it means a lot when we're choosing a wife and where I'm willing to allow my son to travel to. This is no less of discernment than I should have when I'm choosing a friend. I should understand what the land is that this friend of mine is coming into. My heart is a land that belongs to the Lord. And I am promised an eternal kingdom with Jesus. I am promised an eternity with the one that loves me most. So if that promise is constantly in the forefront of my brain, like Abraham always thought about the promise that God gave him, I'm never going to make bad choices with choosing friends. I'm going to be very discerning when I go to choose a friend. Do you guys understand? You understand like why this is linking? So I need to know God's promise to me. So it's worth being so discerning when I'm choosing a friend. If I don't know my value, if I don't know the promise that's waiting for me, any friend works. But if I know the promise and I know what God has promised me in my eternal life with Him, not any friend works. Discernment is really important. Okay, there you go. Sorry. And then there's the story of the 10 lepers. We're almost done. This is like the last slide. Sorry if it's long. Then there's the story of the 10 lepers. It comes from Luke chapter 17. Now it happened as he went to Jerusalem, he being Christ, and he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. Then, as he entered a certain village, there met him 10 men who were lepers, who stood afar off, because they're lepers. And they lifted up their voice and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. So when he saw them, he said to them, Go show yourselves to the priest. And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed. 10 lepers were just healed, right? And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned and with a loud voice glorified God and fell down on his face and his feet, giving him thanks. And he was a Samaritan. So Jesus answered and said, Were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, Arise, go your way. Your faith has made you well. What does this have to do with friendship? 10 lepers came to Jesus. And they said, Help us. And then he helped them and he cleansed them. But only one leper came back to give him thanks. What did the one leper recognize that the other 9 did not? The one leper recognized who he really was. The other 9 just saw him as like, yeah, he's the guy that healed us. Thanks. Deuces. We're out. Right? But Jesus says something really cool. He says, Were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? It's kind of surprising, right? Like Jesus is like, did not all 10 of you get cleansed? But only one of them recognized who Christ was. And that one receives a sentence that the other 9 don't. Arise, go your way, your faith has made you well. Jesus, all 10 were healed. So what does it mean, your faith has made you well? The other 9 didn't go back to becoming lepers. Someone explain to me what Jesus means. What? Their hearts? His heart? Say that again?
Two mics. Yeah, so they were healed physically, but spiritually they were still dead.
Yeah. So both of you are right. Their heart, they were healed physically, but spiritually they were dead. He was healed all the way. Not just the outside, but the inside. But he received that healing because he recognized who God was. He received that healing because he recognized who God was. And in choosing a friend, I must recognize Jesus in this friend. If you don't see Jesus in your friend, this friend can never heal you. This friend can never be a source of lifting your countenance. It's not just like a thing, right? The other 9 saw Jesus as just, a random healer. The one recognized who he was and came back, and he received more healing, the healing that actually matters, spiritual healing. So as I'm choosing my friend, I have to be able to recognize Jesus in this person. I have to be able to look at them and say, yeah, you look like the one that loves me. You look like Christ. You can be a friend of mine. Now, here's the big piece. You know what that friend is going to do? If he's listening to this talk, hopefully. You know what he's going to do? He's going to look right back at you. He's going to say, wait, do you look like Jesus? Oops. Because I want you to think that if you're looking for the friend who looks like Jesus, and they really are devout, and they really are a keeper of the commandments, and they really are gracious with their tongue, and they're really a bringer of peace, guess what they're looking for? So that's why today's exercise of choosing a good friend is hard as a Christian, because I am not just out there looking, I am also changing internally. So I am worthy of a good friend. Guys, this whole equation is not just me judging people. We're not judging anyone, right? But I am changing internally. I am being built internally for the friend I want to have as well. Is the picture complete? Do we get it? Any questions, comments, concerns? Yes. Can somebody give her a mic, please? Wait. So there's 2 people. There's Marina and there's the one.
I was
Okay.
gonna say, can you repeat the last part?
What?
Can you repeat the last part?
Can I repeat the last part? What,
Okay, I understood it. It's just
okay. Put it in a question form so I know what to answer.
1 second, let me put it in a
Okay.
Okay. About the judgment part,
Yes.
how do you not make it about them and make it about you? Or like, how do I make it not about people but more about me?